The confluence of civilized species had, over the course of 3,000 years, developed what they considered to be a remarkably comprehensive definition of weapon. The document ran to approximately 47,000 pages, included holographic appendices, and had been translated into 612 languages, some of which had gone extinct during the translation process. It covered everything from plasma disruptors to molecular destabilizers, from kinetic projectile launchers to exotic matter manipulators, and even included a rather lengthy footnote about particularly sharp dinner utensils following an unfortunate incident at a trade negotiation in 2847. What it did not cover, as it turned out, was ingenuity. Ambassador Krell Vox of the Thessian Concordat took his role as Chief of Security for Neutral Station Theta 9, with the kind of seriousness typically reserved for religious zealots and tax auditors. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world where falling over could prove fatal, which had instilled in them a cultural obsession with stability, order, and really thorough safety protocols. Krell Vox himself stood nearly 3 meters tall, possessed 4 arms, each capable of operating security scanners independently, and had compound eyes that could detect threats in 17 different spectrums of light, including several that most species didn't know existed. He was, by all accounts, impossible to fool. This was about to become hilariously irrelevant. Neutral Station Theta 9 orbited a brown dwarf in unclaimed space, deliberately positioned so that no single species could claim territorial advantage. The station itself was a marvel of paranoid engineering. 27 redundant life support systems, hull plating capable of withstanding direct hits from a cruiser-class vessel, and security measures so elaborate that some delegates joked it would be easier to break into a black hole. The upcoming summit had drawn representatives from 43 member species, all gathered to resolve what the official documents delicately termed spirited disagreements, and what everyone else called the absolute disaster waiting to happen in the Kestrel sector. The human delegation arrived on a modest transport vessel that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and optimism. This was, in fact, exactly what had happened. Humanity had been part of the confluence for only 32 years, barely a heartbeat in galactic terms, and still operated on what the other species diplomatically called a limited infrastructure budget, and what humans called broke as hell, but we're here anyway. The transport docked with all the grace of a drunk asteroid, and the airlock hissed open to reveal 5 humans in what they insisted were formal diplomatic attire. To the assembled alien dignitaries waiting in the reception bay, the humans looked like they'd ransacked a costume shop during a clearance sale. Their clothing was a bizarre mix of fabrics. Their hair came in improbable colors, and they moved with the unsettling confidence of a species that had somehow clawed its way to spaceflight, despite having no natural advantages whatsoever. No claws, no venom, no armored hide, no telepathy, not even decent eyesight. Just audacity and an apparently unlimited capacity for stubbornness. Leading the delegation was Ambassador Chen Wei, a woman in her 60s whose smile was kind and whose eyes suggested she'd seen things that would make a veteran soldier weep. Behind her came her attachés, advisors, and, walking with the easy stride of someone completely unconcerned with the 6 armed security guards tracking her every movement, military attaché Joanna Reeves. Jo, as she preferred to be called, was thoroughly unremarkable by human standards. Average height, average build, dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing a simple gray suit that looked comfortable rather than impressive. She carried no visible weapons, wore no armor, and had the kind of face that you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting her. This was also about to become hilariously relevant. Welcome to Neutral Station Theta 9. Krell announced, his translator rendering his chittering harmonics into flat galactic common. Before we can permit you to enter the summit chambers, all delegates must pass through standard security screening. This is, of course, for everyone's safety and comfort. Of course, Ambassador Chen agreed pleasantly. We're happy to comply with all protocols. Excellent. Krell gestured with two of his four arms toward the security checkpoint, a gleaming archway surrounded by enough scanning equipment to analyze a molecule's political affiliations. The summit operates under strict non-violence accords. No weapons of any kind are permitted beyond this point. No exceptions. The checkpoint itself was a masterpiece of paranoid technology. Sensors could detect everything from conventional firearms to exotic particles, from biological toxins to psionic amplifiers. The scanning process was so thorough that it had once identified a delegate's digestive parasite as a potential security threat, leading to both an embarrassing medical procedure and a strongly worded diplomatic protest. The first to approach was a delegate from the Vrynn collective, a species that looked like someone had crossed a mantis with a tank and given it anger management issues. The Vrynn warrior chittered irritably as she removed her ceremonial plasma caster, her vibroblades, her pulse grenades, and, after some pointed looks from Krell, a small holdout disruptor she'd hidden in what humans would diplomatically call a private location. Next came a representative from the Hastori Empire, flowing through the checkpoint like animate mercury. The Hastori had to surrender a collection of molecular toxins they naturally secreted, which required a specialized containment unit and 3 signatures on liability waivers. One by one, the delegates complied. The pile of surrendered weaponry grew to impressive proportions, representing enough firepower to level a small moon. Krell supervised with grim satisfaction, his compound eyes gleaming with professional pride. Then came the humans. Ambassador Chen passed through without incident, followed by 3 of her staff. The scanners registered their communicators, their data tablets, their ceremonial pens, analyzed and cleared as non-threatening, and absolutely nothing else of concern. Then Joanna Reeves stepped up to the checkpoint. She looked Krell directly in his compound eyes and smiled. Not a threatening smile, not a challenging smile, just a smile that somehow conveyed the impression that she was in on a joke that nobody else had heard yet. No weapons, Krell repeated, because he'd learned that humans sometimes needed things explained multiple times. Beyond this point. Understood, Jo replied cheerfully. Then, with movements so smooth they seemed choreographed, she reached down and unbuckled her belt. The entire reception bay went quiet. Krell security team tensed, hands moving toward their own weapons, which they were allowed to carry, naturally, being security. Every alien delegate present suddenly focused on this unremarkable human woman who was undressing in front of a weapons checkpoint. Jo pulled the belt free from her waist with a satisfying snap of leather, folded it neatly, and placed it on the scanning table. There you go, she said pleasantly. Krell stared at the belt. His scanners stared at the belt. The belt, being an inanimate object, did not stare back, but simply lay there being thoroughly belt-like. It is a belt, Krell said slowly. It is indeed, Jo confirmed. Not a weapon. Nope. She was still smiling that smile. Our scanners detect no hidden components, no technological augmentation, no chemical residues. It is simply processed animal hide and a metal buckle. That's generally what belts are made of, yes. Krell compound eyes swiveled in their sockets, a gesture his species used to indicate confusion. Then why? You said no weapons. Jo interrupted gently. I'm complying. See? She patted her pockets. then began removing items with the systematic efficiency of someone unpacking a particularly boring suitcase. Communicator. Data tablet. Breath mints, want one? No? Your loss. Stylus. Hair tie. Protein bar, these are terrible, by the way. But Chen insists we carry emergency rations. Small notepad. Regular pen, not even a fancy one. Loose change from 3 different currencies, because I keep forgetting to exchange them. Each item was placed on the scanning table. Each item was thoroughly analyzed. Each item came back as exactly what it appeared to be. Mundane, boring, and about as threatening as a particularly passive piece of furniture. The scanners found nothing. Not a hint of explosives. Not a trace of toxic materials. Not even an elevated level of suspicious minerals. Joanna Reeves was, according to every instrument available to the Confluence's most advanced security system, completely and utterly harmless. Krellvox's secondary arms twitched with frustration. "You may proceed," he finally said, though he sounded deeply unsatisfied with this conclusion. Jo collected her items, rebuckled her belt, and walked through the checkpoint with the casual stride of someone who had absolutely nothing to hide, and found the entire process mildly entertaining. The summit chamber was exactly what you'd expect from a civilization that had 47,000 pages of weapons regulations. Aggressively neutral. The walls were a soothing beige that managed to be simultaneously calming and personality-free. The furniture was designed to accommodate 43 different body types, which meant it was comfortable for exactly none of them. The lighting was calibrated to be acceptable to species with visual ranges from infrared to ultraviolet, resulting in an ambiance best described as clinical depression. At the center of the room sat the conference table of eternal neutrality, which was round to prevent anyone from claiming a head position and made from a material that was simultaneously stronger than diamond and more boring than accounting. The delegates filed in, sorted themselves by faction, and began the time-honored tradition of glaring at each other while pretending to review their notes. The crisis at hand involved the Kestrel sector, a region of space that contained 3 habitable planets, 2 asteroid fields rich in rare minerals, and 1 very confusing nebula that occasionally achieved sentience and then forgot about it. The Vrynn collective claimed the sector by right of discovery. The Hastori Empire claimed it by right of historical precedent. Both claims were technically valid, thoroughly documented, and completely incompatible. This would have been merely irritating, except for one small detail. Both the Vrynn and the Hastori were what galactic anthropologists politely termed aggressive expansion species, and what everyone else called those guys who'll fight you over a parking space. The Vrynn had evolved as apex predators on a death world where everything, including the plants, was trying to kill you. They stood 2.5 meters tall, possessed 4 limbs ending in razor-sharp claws, could spit acidic venom with impressive accuracy, and had exoskeletons tough enough to deflect small arms fire. Their idea of negotiation typically involved seeing who was still standing when the screaming stopped. The Hastori were barely corporeal, their bodies composed of a semi-liquid metallic compound that could flow through cracks, reshape itself at will, and conduct enough electricity to power a small city. They could form bladed edges sharp enough to split atoms, generate localized electromagnetic pulses, and had once dissolved an entire diplomatic mission because someone made a joke about mercury being toxic. Neither species had much use for the concept of backing down. The meeting began with the traditional opening remarks, which were polite, formal, and fooled absolutely nobody. Ambassador Chen spoke for humanity, noting that while Earth had no claim to the Kestrel sector, they hoped to facilitate a peaceful resolution that respected all parties' interests. This lasted approximately 14 minutes. The Vrynn delegation leader, War Coordinator Shrix Kal, clicked her mandibles dismissively. The Hastori have no legitimate claim. They discovered the sector by accident while fleeing from a supernova. That is not discovery. That is running away and stumbling into something valuable. The Hastori spokesman, who'd chosen to manifest as a vaguely humanoid blob because it seemed diplomatic, rippled with what might have been indignation. The Vrynn discovered the sector by following our navigation beacons, which we'd left there 200 years prior. That is not discovery. That is theft with extra steps. We followed no beacons, only because you're too primitive to detect them. Primitive? Your species is literally a liquid. And your species is literally insects in armor plating. Ambassador Chen raised a hand. Gentlemen, please. We are not gentlemen, Shrix Kal snapped. We are warriors of the Vrynn Collective, and we do not tolerate insults from... The Hastori spokesman reformed itself into something with more sharp edges. Insults? You want to discuss insults? Your last communication referred to us as mobile puddles with delusions of grandeur. That was not an insult. That was an objective description. Things escalated quickly from there. Within seconds, both delegations were on their feet, or whatever passed for feet in the Hastori's case. Voices rose. Threats were exchanged. A Vrynn junior officer made the mistake of gesturing too aggressively near a Hastori advisor, who interpreted this as an attack and responded by extending a blade-like pseudopod that stopped just short of the Vrynn's throat. The Vrynn, being Vrynn, took this as a challenge. Krelvox's security team rushed toward the chamber doors, only to discover that the station's security protocols, in a fit of beautiful irony, had automatically locked all weapons in the security vault when the summit began. They stood outside the transparent aluminum viewing wall, watching helplessly as the situation deteriorated. Inside the chamber, Shrix Kal lunged forward with the kind of speed that came from evolving to catch prey that really didn't want to be caught. Her claws extended, her mandibles spread wide, and she released a hissing war cry that had, historically, been the last sound many beings ever heard. The Hastori spokesman dissolved into a liquid state and reformed as a metallic whip, crackling with electrical charge. The other delegates scrambled for cover, overturning chairs and diving behind the conference table of eternal neutrality, which was living up to its name by remaining studiously uninvolved. Ambassador Chen looked at Joanna Reeves. Joe? Joe had been leaning against the wall, watching the proceedings with the detached interest of someone observing a particularly dramatic nature documentary. Now she sighed, pushed off from the wall, and said, "Yeah, all right. Give me a second." She walked, not ran, walked, toward the center of the chaos with the casual stride of someone heading to the kitchen for a snack. Shrix Kal noticed the approaching human and swiped at her with claws designed to rend armor plating. Joe sidestepped the attack with minimal effort, grabbed the conference chair nearest to her, and in one smooth motion, swung it upward into Shrix Kal's midsection. The Vrynn warrior doubled over with a whoosh of expelled air, too surprised to react. The Hastori whip lashed toward Joe's back. Without turning around, she kicked backward, connecting with a section of the Hastori's mass and sending ripples through the liquid metal. The Hastori recoiled, reforming several meters away. Joe set the chair down carefully, making sure it didn't get scratched. "Okay," she said conversationally. "I need you both to take about 3 steps back and several deep breaths." "You dare interfere?" Shrix Kal wheezed, recovering her breath. "You are unarmed. You are weak. You are..." Joe picked up the conference table. The conference table of eternal neutrality weighed approximately 200 kilograms, having been constructed to withstand anything short of orbital bombardment. Joe lifted it like it was made of cardboard, turned it on its edge, and slammed it down between the Vrynn and Hastori delegations with a sound like thunder. Every being in the room froze. As I was saying, Joe continued, not even breathing hard, everyone needs to calm down before someone gets hurt. She glanced at Shriek's Kull. And before you ask, yes, humans have significantly higher muscle density than you'd expect for our size. Something about evolving as endurance hunters on a planet that was actively trying to kill us builds character. The Hastori spokesman reformed into something resembling their earlier shape, though noticeably more cautious. You cannot stop us both. We are warriors. You are one small mammal. Joe looked around the room, her gaze cataloging exits, furniture placement, structural weaknesses, and about 17 other things that nobody else was paying attention to. You know what's funny? She said, reaching up to pull a decorative curtain rod from the wall. The heavy metal bar came free with a satisfying screech. Your whole confluence has spent 3,000 years defining weapons. You've got categories and subcategories and special exemptions and grandfather clauses. 47,000 pages of, this is a weapon, this is not a weapon. She tested the weight of the curtain rod, gave it an experimental swing. But humans, we never bothered with those kinds of distinctions. She smiled that smile again, because we figured out a long time ago that anything is a weapon if you're creative enough. Shriek's Kull lunged again, because the Vrynn were nothing if not persistent. Joe sidestepped, used the curtain rod to hook the warrior's leg, and sent her crashing into the overturned conference table. Before Shriek's Kull could recover, Joe had torn the curtain from its mounting, the actual fabric curtain, wrapped it around the warrior's claws, and tied it off with a knot that would have made a sailor weep with joy. These are nice curtains, Joe observed, securing the binding. What's this, Thessian silk? Must have cost a fortune. The Hastori spokesman tried to engulf her from behind, flowing forward in a wave of liquid metal. Joe grabbed the nearest chair, jammed one of its legs into an electrical outlet in the wall, and watched as several thousand volts of electricity coursed through the chair's metal frame. She didn't touch the chair. She just held it by its plastic cushion, using it like the world's most uncomfortable cattle prod, and herded the Hastori spokesman into a corner where several other Hastori were cowering. Please stay there, she said politely. I really don't want to have to electrocute anyone today. It's murder on the station's power bill. A junior Vrynn officer tried to rush her from the side. Joe picked up her protein bar, the terrible one she'd mentioned earlier, unwrapped it, and threw it with enough force that it hit the officer square between the eyes. The Vrynn stumbled backward, tripped over an overturned chair, and landed in an undignified heap. Told you those rations were terrible, Joe remarked to no one in particular. She moved through the chaos like a choreographer arranging a particularly violent ballet. Every object in the room became a tool. Chairs became barriers, table legs became levers. Even the data tablets left on desks became projectiles when thrown with sufficient velocity and surprising accuracy. A Vrynn warrior tried to spit venom at her. Joe grabbed a decorative plant, some kind of engineered fern that the station's botanist had insisted would really tie the room together, and used it as a shield. The venom hissed against the leaves, which apparently were venom-resistant because the confluence spared no expense on their decorative foliage. Interesting choice for interior decoration, Joe commented, examining the plant. Practical and aesthetic. Then she threw the entire planter at another advancing Vrynn, who went down in a shower of soil and complaints. The Hastori attempted to coordinate an attack, flowing together to create a larger, more threatening form. Joe pulled down another curtain rod, threaded the fabric through it like the world's most aggressive tent pole, and created an improvised barrier that the Hastori couldn't flow through without getting tangled in Thessian silk. "You're really making me work for this," she said, slightly out of breath now. "I appreciate the exercise, but this is way more cardio than I was planning for today." Shriek's Kull, having freed herself from the curtain bindings through sheer determination and several torn claws, charged one final time with a roar that shook the walls. Joe waited until the last possible second, then simply stepped aside, grabbed the warrior's own momentum, and redirected it straight into the wall. The impact left a Vrynn-shaped dent in the indestructible wall plating. "Huh," Joe said, examining the damage. "Guess nothing's really indestructible if you hit it hard enough." The chamber fell silent, except for the groaning of various injured warriors and the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Joe stood in the center of the room, surrounded by overturned furniture, torn curtains, broken pottery, scattered decorative plants, and about 15 different beings who were rethinking their life choices. She wasn't even breathing that hard. Krelvox finally managed to override the security locks and burst into the room with his entire security team, weapons drawn and ready for a war zone. Instead, they found one human woman calmly straightening her suit, while the representatives of two of the galaxy's most aggressive warrior species sat in various corners looking thoroughly defeated by office furniture. "What?" Krelvox's translator struggled with whatever sound he just made. "What happened here?" Ambassador Chen, who'd watched the entire thing from behind an overturned desk with the calm of someone who'd seen this exact scenario play out at least twice before, stood up and brushed off her suit. There was a minor disagreement. Attaché Reeves facilitated a de-escalation. De-escalation? Krelvox looked at the destroyed conference room. "This looks like a battle zone." "You should see what it looks like when we actually fight," Joe said helpfully. She'd retrieved her protein bar, or what was left of it after it had been weaponized, and was attempting to clean off the Vrynn officer's blood. "Anyone got a napkin?" Shrixkal pulled herself from the wall, her armor plating cracked, but her dignity even more damaged. "You," she wheezed. "You used no weapons." "Correct," Joe agreed. "You used furniture." "Also correct." "And curtains." "Those were really nice curtains, too. Sorry about that." She didn't sound particularly sorry. The Hastori spokesman reformed itself, though noticeably smaller and less threatening than before. "How did you... Your species has no natural weapons. No claws, no venom, no armored hide. You should be prey, not predator." Joe considered this. "You know what's funny? We asked ourselves the same question about 60,000 years ago when we were getting chased around by everything on our planet that had bigger teeth than us. And you know what we figured out?" She smiled. And this time, it was the smile of a species that had clawed its way to the top of their food chain through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to stay dead. "We didn't need specialized weapons because we learned to make everything into a weapon. That rock, weapon. That stick, weapon. That pile of bones from dinner, weapon, and also building materials. That friendly wolf that kept hanging around our campfire, best friend and co-weapon." She gestured around the ruined conference room. "You all evolved specific tools for specific jobs, which is great, don't get me wrong, very efficient. But humans evolved one tool, our brain. And our brain's favorite game is How can I use this random object to solve my problems? Usually violently, sometimes not. Depends on the day. Krelvox was running scanners over the room, his compound eyes swiveling in distress. But our security protocols, our weapons regulations, they specifically prevent weapons. Joe interrupted gently. They don't prevent creativity, or physics, or the fact that a chair moving at sufficient velocity will absolutely ruin someone's day, regardless of whether it's classified as a weapon. One of the junior Vrynn officers, still sitting in a pile of dirt and broken pottery, clicked his mandibles weakly. But this was supposed to be a secure location. No weapons allowed. We agreed to meet here because it would be safe. It is safe, Ambassador Chen said, stepping forward. Because as Attaché Reeves has demonstrated, violence is a choice, not an inevitability. You both chose to engage in combat despite being in a weapons-free zone. The lack of weapons didn't stop you. It just changed your tactics. She looked at both delegations with the kind of expression that grandmothers reserved for children who'd been caught fighting in church. Now, we can continue down this path, where you both try to hurt each other with increasingly creative uses of office supplies, or we can sit down like civilized beings and actually negotiate a solution to the Kestrel sector dispute. Your choice. Shrix and the Hastori spokesman looked at each other, then at the ruined conference room, then at Joe, who was now using her stylus to pick plant debris out of her braid. We will negotiate, Shrix said slowly, as if the word was new to her. An acceptable course of action. The Hastori agreed, rippling with what might have been embarrassment. Wonderful, Ambassador Chen said brightly. Shall we reconvene in 1 hour? That should give station maintenance time to fix the furniture and everyone time to patch up their wounded dignity. As the delegations filed out, carefully avoiding eye contact with each other and especially with Joe, Krelvox approached the human attaché with the air of someone approaching a malfunctioning reactor. I must ask, he said quietly, all 4 arms clasped in a gesture of deep confusion. What would you have done if you had actually brought weapons? Joe looked up from her braid, considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, and smiled that smile one final time. Honestly, probably the same thing. Weapons are just tools, Ambassador. And humans learned a long time ago that the best tool is the one you have on hand when you need it. She gestured at the destroyed conference room. Besides, actual weapons would have been boring. Where's the creativity in just shooting someone? Krelvox made a sound that the translator gave up trying to interpret. 3 hours later, after furious negotiation, creative compromise, and only 2 more minor incidents involving creative use of office supplies, the Vrynn Collective and Hastori Empire reached an agreement on the Kestrel sector. They would jointly develop the region, with clearly defined territorial boundaries, shared mining operations, and a mutual defense pact that surprised absolutely everyone. Some observers suggested that both sides had been motivated less by diplomatic wisdom and more by a shared desire to never, ever be in a room with a weaponless human again. The summit was declared a resounding success. The delegates departed with signed agreements, renewed respect for the negotiation process, and a collective decision to never speak of the furniture incident in official records. Krelvox, for his part, spent 3 weeks revising the Confluence's weapons regulations. The new edition ran to 47,032 pages and included an entire chapter titled Regarding Humans and the Weaponization of Literally Everything. It was still insufficient. As the human delegation prepared to depart neutral station Theta 9, Joe stood at the viewing port, looking out at the stars with the satisfied expression of someone who'd done a good day's work and hadn't even needed to fill out excessive paperwork. Ambassador Chen joined her, 2 cups of terrible station coffee in hand. "You enjoyed that, didn't you?" "Enjoyed what?" Joe asked innocently, accepting the coffee. "Proving that our entire species is terrifying." Joe considered this, took a sip of coffee, grimaced at the taste, and shrugged. Someone had to remind them that evolution isn't just about who has the biggest claws. Sometimes it's about who's creative enough to turn a conference room into a tactical advantage. She paused. "Also, those Vrynn were being really rude to you during the opening remarks. Nobody talks to my ambassador that way." Chen laughed. "My hero." As their transport pulled away from the station, Krelvox watched from his security office, all 4 arms wrapped around himself in what humans would recognize as a self-comforting gesture. His assistant, a young Thessian who'd witnessed the entire incident, approached cautiously. "Sir, should we recommend updating security protocols for future human visits?" Krelvox's compound eyes swiveled to regard his assistant with an expression that conveyed millennia of evolutionary wisdom and absolute certainty. "Update them to what? Remove all furniture? Strip the walls? Conduct negotiations in empty space?" He gestured at his monitors, which still showed footage of Joe's systematic dismantling of 2 warrior species using nothing but interior decoration. "They don't need weapons. They don't even need tools. They just need things. And there are always things. So what do we do?" Krelvox was quiet for a long moment, watching the human transport disappear into the darkness of space. "We thank the universe that they're on our side. And we never, ever make them angry enough to get creative." The assistant nodded slowly. "I'll add that to the official report." "Make sure you do. And add a note recommending that all future diplomatic venues hosting humans be stocked with particularly sturdy furniture. If they're going to weaponize our conference rooms, we might as well make sure the furniture can handle it." Somewhere in the darkness of space, aboard a transport held together by spare parts and optimism, Joanna Reeves rebuckled her belt. Just a simple belt, nothing special, certainly not a weapon, and smiled to herself. After all, humans had spent millennia learning to survive on a planet that was trying to kill them with everything from weather to wildlife. They'd learned to turn rocks into tools, tools into technology, and technology into civilizations that reached for the stars. Why would they ever need specialized weapons when literally everything was a weapon if you just tried hard enough? The confluence of civilized species would eventually understand this fundamental truth about humanity. Some learned it through careful observation and cultural exchange. Others learned it the hard way, in a conference room, with furniture. But they all learned. And in the grand archive of the confluence, in the official records of the Theta 9 Summit, there exists a single footnote to the Kestrel Sector Accords. It reads simply, "Resolution achieved through unconventional diplomatic methods. Human involvement noted. Request all future negotiators review attached footage before engaging in aggressive posturing." The footage ran for 6 minutes and 43 seconds. It was mandatory viewing for all new diplomatic staff. It had been downloaded over 6 million times, had spawned 3 separate academic papers on applied improvisation in combat scenarios, and had fundamentally changed how the galaxy thought about the phrase unarmed and harmless. Because in the end, the confluence learned what humans had known for 60,000 years. Weapons aren't what make you dangerous. Creativity is what makes you dangerous. Weapons just make it easier. And humans had never been ones to take the easy path,